The golem, on the other hand, was the last of its kind. Golems are magical creatures. They are created when a soul, formed from raw magic, is then fused to a body made of clay and earth. Creating a golem, however, is a very delicate process, and any mistake can result in a golem being simple-minded or even psychotic. For centuries, the Jewish people had created golems as great warriors to battle against the forces of darkness, but sadly, the ritual to create these beasts had been lost, as the numerous groups and communities who held on to the knowledge for their own sake were wiped out, or forsook the old magics as either superstition or evil. In the year 1940, however, the first and only golem in at least 500 years was created, when a young Jewish girl named Rosa, terrified of the Nazis marching on her city, searched through her grandfather Raymond Meyer's old attic for anything that could combat them. Magic had been in her family for hundreds of years, but again, like the majority of people in the modern world, most of her family had dismissed it as hokum. Rosa's grandfather was something of an exception, and at least still had an interest in the paranormal, even if he never really bothered to learn magic, and more enjoyed telling her stories about her ancestors' battles with vampires and demons. Nevertheless, when his granddaughter began to rifle through his collection, he tried to put a stop to it, but as the Nazi forces spread through Europe like the bubonic plague, Rosa refused to back down, and eventually her grandfather agreed to help her. He had always been tempted to create his own golem, but the fear of it going wrong put him off. The Nazis, however, scared him more. The process went well to some extent, thanks to the mayor's ancestors writing the details of the spell down in such vivid detail. The golem Rosa created was intelligent and articulate, though it did have an explosive temper. It ultimately had tremendous affection for Raymond and Rosa, viewing them as its family. Still, even they sometimes found it hard to calm the beast down if it was angered. When the Nazis invaded, the golem slaughtered their entire battalion. None of their weapons were able to even pierce its skin. At first, Raymond and Rosa were hailed as heroes, but unfortunately, the Nazis would next turn to the paranormal for help. They had allied themselves very closely with the vampires of Germany, who had long hoped to build an empire like their rivals, the Vandals, had done centuries ago. They were also attracted to the Nazis' ideas of racial superiority. They hoped that the Nazis could create a race of supermen, for them to turn into vampires, combining the greatest of humanity and demonkind in their minds alike. Naturally, both the Nazis and the vampires had every intention of betraying one another once the war was over, but for now, they were close allies. This platoon of vampires, though still no match for the golem physically, were better equipped in the black arts than the Nazis. Their leader had actually been around when the last golem walked this earth and knew exactly what their weaknesses were. A special kind of magical tar named deslak that hardened the golem's skin until it shattered to dust. Rosa's golem was overpowered using the deslak before he could even raise his fists, and the vampires subsequently took the town for their even more vile human allies. Rosa, however, escaped thanks to Raymond. Sadly, neither he nor Rosa had mastered the magics enough to use them effectively, but at the very least, Raymond was able to conjure up a few tricks to distract the vampires long enough for Rosa to get away. Before she fled, he also gave her the necessary magics to heal the golem, which the vampires had proceeded to torture in its dying state. Rosa found the beast, revived it, after which it brutally killed its torturers, and then fled into the wilderness with the golem, who soon became the only family she had left. The vampires not only slaughtered Rosa's family, They destroyed all of the Meyer family's spells, which contained the last known ritual for creating a golem. The vampires didn't want the Nazis to get their hands on the formula, as an army of golems would have made the vampires redundant. At the same time, vampires didn't trust each other not to use one of the spells to gain ultimate power over the others either. Given what backstabbers the vampires were, it was probably a sound worry. Rosa and the Golem remained on the run for months before joining the Allies' side, where they would later be recruited by the legendary Professor Fang to be part of his special group known as the Magic Gang, which also included the original Frankenstein's monster, Lorimer Van Helsing, Countess Meyer, Dracula's daughter, Helga, a Norwegian expert on witches, and King Arthur himself, whose resurrection in Britain's time of need had been botched by Nazi demon agents, rendering him mostly powerless. Still, the Magic Gang proved to be among the greatest heroes of the war. Their most important mission was on the night of Hitler's death. Knowing that he was defeated, Hitler intended to have his allies unleash the Dark Fog, a mystical prison for the shadow demons. The first of these creatures, at least according to legend, was a young girl who had been transformed into a vampire and was captured by the gods, who attempted to find a way to cure her. Apparently, the spell worked at first, and the girl was celebrated as a triumph of the gods, but sadly, the curse of vampirism soon returned. Unable to infect her in a normal way thanks to the gods' magic, the curse of Castran and the powers of the gods wrestled for control violently, ripping her body to pieces. Her soul still survived, however, and became infested with both. Her anger and resentment at the gods who turned their backs on and tried to destroy her caused the hatred within the girl to grow, and she became a malevolent entity who soon infected others. She could only infect them when possessing a host, which she could only do for a limited time before the host's body blew apart. The same would apply to those she transformed into creatures like her too. The shadow demons, as she and her kind came to be known, were a danger to both human and demon alike. They particularly hated vampires, and were eventually sealed within a mystical prison, really a pocket dimension, created by the gods, who hoped to study the demons in an effort to see what went wrong with their supposed miracle cure. The pocket dimension, which took on the form of a sphere, was later stolen by a vampire who hoped to destroy it, but when he saw that wasn't possible, he buried it in the earth. Following this, the sphere was later discovered by numerous other forces throughout the years, many of whom hoped to try and harness the power of the gods, and even the demons themselves within, for their own purposes, all of which failed. Eventually, it fell into the custody of Hitler, who, knowing how dangerous it was, had never dared tamper with the sphere. Now that he knew he was done for, Hitler did not want Germany to go on without him, and unleashed the shadow demons on his homeland, despite the gang's efforts. Fortunately, the Magic Gang were able, after Hitler's death, to use the sphere to recapture most of the demons, but a handful, including their leader, still escaped and continued to possess others, causing suffering and pain throughout Germany for the next several decades, with the Golem in particular doing all it could do to hunt them down. The Golem also continued to travel with Rosa after the war until the 1950s, when she finally settled down and had a family, after which it then struck out on its own. The Magic Gang did eventually reunite near the end of the 1970s, but by the 90s the Golem was once again on its own before being recruited as part of the Spook Family.